I signed just one piece of paper to help my son's wife. 6 months later, I stood on my own porch and was told I no longer lived there. The new owners had the keys. My name had vanished from the deed. My voice meant nothing. I called 911 with shaking hands. But when the officers arrived, they said it was a legal transaction. That night, I didn't just lose a house. I lost the last bit of trust I had left for my family. But I still had one thing they didn't know about. What happens when the woman they tried to erase decides to fight back? They watched me pack my things as if I were a tenant being evicted. No words, just glances. The new owners stood behind the moving truck, talking to the sheriff, and my son's wife, April, stood off to the side, pretending to be on her phone. She didn't even look at me. I had 15 minutes to leave the house I had lived in for over 30 years. I stood on the porch, keys dangling from my fingers, and handed them over to the sheriff. My name was no longer on the deed. My furniture was in the driveway. I asked the sheriff if I could sit for a minute. He said no. The new owners wanted me gone. Behind the front windows, I saw April walking through my living room, already talking about where the new couch should go. That couch used to be mine. The air smelled like pine and lake water. The wind carried the sound of birds and distant boat engines, but none of it calmed me. I had never felt so erased. They called it a legal transaction. But legal doesn't mean right. It doesn't mean just. It certainly doesn't mean fair. 6 months earlier, April asked for a loan. She said it was for medical bills and short-term expenses. I told her I didn't have that kind of cash. She smiled, like she already had a solution. She offered to help me apply for a refinance, just to unlock a little bit of the house's value. Just a small loan, she said, using my name, against the home I fully owned. I didn't read the final papers. That was my mistake. Now they had the deed. They had my life. I had 2 suitcases and my purse. I walked to the end of the driveway. My hands were shaking, but I kept my head up. I didn't want them to see me cry. Across the street, Mrs. Porter was standing at her window. She'd been my neighbor for over 20 years. She didn't wave. She didn't move. Just watched, like the whole world had paused to see if I would fall apart. And I almost did. But something inside me stayed still. Not calm, not numb, just still, like a match that hadn't been struck yet. I checked into a motel 15 minutes down the highway, the kind with sticky floors and air conditioning that never quite works. I asked for the room farthest from the street. I didn't want anyone to see me. That first night, I sat on the edge of the motel bed, still wearing my shoes. I didn't unpack. I didn't eat. I just stared at the blank wall in front of me. For hours. Not because I was frozen, but because I was thinking. They had taken everything. But they hadn't taken my mind, or my memory, or my ability to act. At 11:42 p.m., I took out my notebook, the one I kept tucked behind old family recipes in the kitchen, the one with all my banking records, passwords, saved contacts, legal notes, every detail of every bill and document I'd ever handled. I flipped through until I found the phone number I hadn't dialed in 15 years. Agnes Porter. Yes, the same Mrs. Porter who had watched me from across the street. She was more than a neighbor. She was a retired civil judge. Quiet, sharp, dangerous if you crossed her. She used to tell me things about contracts, clauses, elderly rights. I never thought I'd need any of it. But now I needed all of it. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Her voice was flat at first, guarded. But the second she heard mine, something changed. She said, "Come over. I'll make tea." I said, "It's almost midnight." She said, "Good. I like starting trouble when the world is sleeping." I packed my notebook and my ID. I took the motel towel with me, not because I planned to steal it, but because it felt like armor. Before I left, I looked in the mirror. My face was tired. My hair was stiff. But my eyes, they were awake. That was the moment I decided. I would not beg to have my house back. I would not cry in front of my son. I would not let April think she had outsmarted me. They had taken the deed, but I had something they didn't know. Me. And I wasn't done. Agnes lived exactly across the street from the house I had just been forced to leave. From her kitchen window, she could still see the porch where I used to drink coffee every morning. That porch was dark now. Someone else's car was in the driveway. She opened the door before I knocked. Her house was quiet, filled with the smell of Earl Grey and the warmth of wood floors that hadn't changed since the 80s. She didn't waste time with pity. She poured the tea, set a file folder on the table, and nodded at my notebook. We started going through the papers, loan agreements, titles, notarizations, all in my name, all signed by me. Except I didn't remember signing them, at least not like that. Agnes didn't blink. She asked me to describe the day I signed, the room, the people in it, what they said. I told her everything. How April brought a man she called a notary. How Dylan barely spoke. How I had been told to sign quickly because the office was closing soon. She sat back in her chair and said one word: fraud. She asked if I had ever received the closing documents in the mail. I hadn't. She asked if I had copies of the appraisal, the loan disclosures, the rescission period forms. I didn't even know what those were. Agnes scribbled notes, page after page. Her hands were fast, precise. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pause. That was what made her terrifying. At 3 a.m, she told me what she saw. This wasn't just a mistake. This wasn't just me being naive. It was premeditated, structured, executed with confidence that I would never push back. She leaned forward, hands laced together. They think you're tired. They think you'll disappear. So you're going to do the opposite. I nodded. The next morning, I didn't go back to the motel. Agnes offered me the guest room. I didn't want to be a burden, but she said it wasn't charity. It was war strategy. Her words. Before lunch, we were at the office of Attorney McDougall. He was a middle-aged man with sharp glasses and a quiet, unnerving stillness about him. Agnes introduced me. He already knew the basics. She had called him overnight. He didn't shake hands. He opened a folder and said, "Let's begin." I told my story again, this time with more detail. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked if I had spoken to April or Dylan since I was removed from the house. I told him no. He said that was good. He said silence was power. We went through everything: the signatures, the dates, the missing forms, the timeline. When I told him about the amount April had asked for and the actual title transfer that occurred behind my back, his expression didn't change, but he underlined something 3 times in red ink. He asked if I had told anyone else. I said no. He leaned back, closed the folder, and said one sentence that I will never forget. "You are not just a victim. You are a witness to a crime." That word, crime, it echoed. Not mistake, not misunderstanding. Crime. McDougall said we had 2 tracks to move on, civil and criminal. One would get the house back, the other would hold April accountable for what she did. I asked how long it would take. He said not long. The evidence was strong. The signature mismatches were visible under magnification. The notary April brought was under investigation in another case. The appraisal was inflated. The title transfer happened 2 days before my supposed signing date. It was all there. Buried in paperwork, but there. He printed out a plan, A literal plan, week by week, motion filings, hearing requests, demand letters. I stared at the list, and for the first time in weeks, I felt something that almost scared me. Control. Not anger, not sadness, control. I had no intention of waiting for court dates to feel better. McDougall said I needed to lie low, not to reach out, not to post anything, not to confront anyone. But I had other ideas. That evening, while Agnes was making soup, I asked her for one favor. She asked what kind. I said I wanted to know everything. Everything about April. Her finances, her debts, her reputation, what people thought of her, what her co-workers whispered behind her back, what she said when I wasn't in the room. Agnes said she knew someone, a woman who used to work with April at her old firm, someone who owed Agnes a favor. By the end of the night, we had a list of names, people to contact, places to check. This wasn't revenge. This was recovery. April had stolen my house, but I would take something bigger from her. Her silence, her image, her certainty that I would stay quiet. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I was no longer a woman in shock. I was a woman in motion. Agnes kept her promises. 2 days after our meeting with McDougall, she handed me a list of names. Women from her network. Women April had worked with, crossed, or underestimated. The first was a woman named Claire Jennings. She had been a junior associate at the same firm where April used to work, back before April married Dylan. Claire now ran a freelance compliance business from her home, about 20 minutes away. Agnes called her first. No threats, no leverage, just one sentence. I need the truth about April Ryland. Claire agreed to meet. The next morning, we sat in a corner booth at a small diner outside town, the kind with cracked vinyl seats and bad coffee that somehow tastes better than good coffee. Claire arrived right on time. She was young, maybe mid-30s, hair tied back, blazer too big. She didn't waste time with greetings. She opened a folder, and the first thing I saw was a copy of a resignation letter. April's name, dated 2 years ago. Claire slid it toward me. She said April left the firm abruptly after a partner found inconsistencies in her billing hours. Nothing was proven, but the whispers spread. Claire used the word inflated twice. She also used the word reputation, as in April cared more about her reputation than her ethics. I asked Claire what she thought April would do if she needed fast money. Claire didn't even blink. She said April would make it look clean, make it look legal, and make someone else hold the bag. It was like hearing someone describe exactly what had just happened to me. She also mentioned that April had kept ties with a man named Ron Briggs, a loan officer with a reputation for shortcuts. Claire didn't know if he had helped with my house situation, but she was sure he had helped April before. The name stuck with me. When we left the diner, I thanked Claire. She said nothing, but her eyes softened just enough to tell me she understood. Back at Agnes's house, I gave McDougall the name, Ron Briggs. He didn't react, but he wrote it down. He said quietly that if Briggs touched the documents, it would explain the speed and the gaps in the paperwork. That was the first time I saw something like fire behind his eyes. That night, while Agnes worked at her desk, I took a walk, just around the block. It was cold, but I needed to clear my head. My house was only 100 yards away, glowing like it belonged to someone else. From the sidewalk, I could see the new curtains April had put up. I saw Dylan's car in the driveway. I even saw my old garden tools hanging in the garage. What I didn't expect to see was my granddaughter, Hannah. She was sitting on the steps, coat zipped up, feet swinging, holding a juice pouch in both hands. She didn't see me at first. I didn't know if I should keep walking. I didn't want to make this harder for her. But then she looked up, saw me, and smiled. A small, confused smile. I waved gently. She waved back. Then she stood and walked toward me, quick little steps, like she didn't want to be caught. She hugged me around the waist before I could even kneel. I told her I missed her. She said she missed me too. Then she looked over her shoulder and whispered that she wasn't supposed to talk to me. She said Mommy gets mad. I didn't ask questions. I just listened. Then she said something that made me stop breathing. She said, Mommy said the house is ours now because Grandma gave it to us. She said Grandma signed the paper so she doesn't live here anymore. I asked if Mommy had said when I was coming back. Hannah shook her head. She said Mommy said Grandma doesn't belong here anymore. Those words. They didn't come from a misunderstanding. They came from April's mouth, passed through a child who didn't yet know what betrayal meant. I told Hannah I would see her again soon. I watched her run back up the steps and disappear inside. When I got back to Agnes's house, I wrote everything down, word for word. Children don't lie like adults do. They repeat what they hear. And sometimes, that's all the proof you need. The next day, McDougall filed the first motion. He also had an idea. He said April was about to host a company event at a private banquet hall across the lake, a client appreciation dinner. She had posted about it on her professional page, pictures of wine glasses and string lights. The caption said, "Celebrating growth and gratitude." McDougall wanted to attend, as a guest, as a witness. He said it would be better if I didn't come. Too risky. I told him I was going. He didn't argue. He just said, then we do it carefully. For the next 3 days, I prepared. I printed photos of the house, invoices with my name, bank statements showing my ownership. Agnes helped me build a quiet portfolio of facts. No drama, no theatrics, just truth, documented and undeniable. On the day of the event, I dressed in navy, clean, quiet, solid. McDougall drove, Agnes stayed behind. We arrived early, sat near the back, waited. April was glowing, laughing, shaking hands like a congresswoman. Dylan stood beside her, nodding politely, clearly out of his depth. The room was warm with fairy lights and champagne, but none of it mattered. At exactly 7:42, McDougall stood and walked to the podium. He tapped the mic once, then introduced himself as an attorney for Lorraine Haskins. The room went silent. April froze. He said he was there to deliver a formal cease and desist regarding the use of stolen property for corporate gain. He said further action was pending. He handed her the file. She reached for it slowly, smile still frozen in place. People were already pulling out their phones. I walked up behind him, looked April straight in the eyes, and said 7 words. That house was never yours to take. April stood still, holding the file McDougall had handed her like it might explode in her hands. Her smile hadn't fully faded, but it had cracked. Around us, voices started whispering. Someone coughed. Another cleared their throat. I could feel the shift in the room. Politeness gave way to tension, then to quiet judgment. And April? She was trapped in her own performance, with no script left. Dylan looked at her, then at me, then back at McDougall. His hands twitched like he wanted to step in, say something, do anything. But he stayed silent. That silence said more than anything else could have. McDougall didn't linger. He nodded politely, turned, and walked out with me behind him. We didn't need to wait for the explosion. We had already lit the match. Back in the car, I didn't speak. My hands were steady, my breath even. McDougall asked if I was ready for what came next. I said I had been ready since the night I called 911. The next morning, the first email landed. Subject line, cease and desist filed. That afternoon, April's company received a formal complaint. The day after that, the title insurance company was served with a subpoena for the documents tied to the transfer of my home. McDougall moved fast, faster than I expected. By the end of the week, April's social media had gone dark. No more inspirational quotes, no more luxury flat lays or lakeside photo shoots. Silence. But the silence didn't mean retreat. On Monday morning, I received a certified letter from her attorney. It was thinly veiled, cold, claimed defamation, demanded withdrawal of all legal action. McDougall laughed when he read it. He filed the official fraud complaint before lunch. That same evening, a reporter named Daniel Price called. He had gotten wind of the case from someone at the clerk's office. He asked McDougall for permission to publish. McDougall deferred to me. I told him one sentence. Tell the truth. All of it. 2 days later, the article dropped. The headline was direct. 72-year-old woman evicted from own home after signing loan papers. It ran with side-by-side photos of me and April. One showed me from years ago in my garden. The other showed April at a ribbon cutting beaming in heels and pearls. The contrast hit hard. Within 24 hours, the article had gone viral. Comments flooded in, shares multiplied. I ignored most of it, but I read enough to know the tide was turning. What had been a private betrayal became a public reckoning. Agnes received a call from a former city councilwoman who had also been burned by April in a development scheme. She offered her support and gave us more names. April had made enemies, quiet ones, professional ones, but enemies all the same. Meanwhile, the court date was set. Preliminary hearing, 14 days from the filing. McDougall said we were well ahead. What I didn't expect was the phone call from Dylan. It came late. I recognized the number but let it go to voicemail. His message was short. Mumbled apology. Said things were complicated. Said April was under a lot of pressure. Said Hannah missed me. I didn't respond. 2 days later, another letter came. This one was from the bank. My mortgage, which had been closed years ago, had been reactivated. That was impossible. I had paid it off. McDougall called the bank immediately. After 2 hours and 3 supervisors, the truth came out. Ron Briggs. His name was on the internal notes. He had accessed the closed file, created a new loan ID, attached a phantom debt to my name, all without proper reauthorization. McDougall filed an emergency injunction. Briggs was suspended within 48 hours. April's attorney went silent. No more threats, no more letters. And then came the best part. The county clerk's office reviewed the deed transfer and found a critical irregularity. A notarization dated before the document existed. That meant tampering. That meant intent. I received an official call from the prosecutor's office. They were opening a criminal investigation into April and Briggs. McDougall said we were about to cross a line, civil to criminal, from fighting for my home to fighting for justice. That night, I sat on Agnes's porch. The lights were off. The lake was quiet. But my mind was sharp. I didn't feel vindicated yet. I felt focused, clear, like I was finally seeing what had been there all along. April had believed I was too soft to fight, too grateful to resist, too old to matter. She was wrong on every count. When I woke the next morning, I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. The same one I had carried from the motel. I flipped past the pages filled with notes, names, court dates, and evidence. I stopped on a blank sheet. At the top, I wrote the word, rebuild. Then I circled it. Not because I had lost, but because I had started to win. And winning, for someone like me, meant not just getting my house back. It meant making sure the people who took it never slept soundly again. It meant making sure every other woman out there who had been told she was too late, too weak, or too old would hear my story and remember she wasn't alone. 3 days after the prosecutor's office opened their investigation, Dylan showed up at Agnes's house. He didn't call first. He just parked his car halfway up the driveway and sat there for a minute, engine running. I saw him through the window. His posture was different, no longer puffed up, proud or smug. He looked small in that car, like a boy trying to gather enough courage to knock on a door he wasn't sure he belonged in front of. Agnes wasn't home. MacDougall had gone into the city for a meeting. It was just me, a half-finished crossword puzzle, and the sound of tires rolling slow on gravel. He finally stepped out. He had no flowers, no bag, no papers in his hand, just his face. And that told me more than I needed. I opened the door before he could knock. He looked surprised. Not that I was there, but that I opened it without hesitation. He asked if he could come in. I stepped aside. He sat down at the kitchen table. Same spot he always sat at family dinners. Same spot he used to colour in when he was 5. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Neither did I. The silence hung between us like fog, thick and shapeless, but not empty. Then he finally said something. He said he didn't know, not all of it, not the whole plan. He said April had handled the paperwork. He said she had told him it was above board, just a refinance, just temporary, just to get through a tough patch. He said he believed her. I watched him say those things. His voice cracked in the middle. His eyes were red, but I didn't interrupt. He said he didn't expect it to go that far. He said he thought we'd talk it through, fix it quietly, keep it in the family. He didn't expect lawyers. He didn't expect reporters. He didn't expect it to go public. And that, more than anything, told me everything I needed to know. He wasn't sorry for what happened. He was sorry it wasn't hidden. I asked him why he never called, why he let me sleep in a motel, why he let April tell Hannah that her grandmother didn't belong anymore. He didn't answer. He just looked down at his hands. I asked him when he stopped seeing me as his mother and started seeing me as a problem. Still no answer. So I filled the space. I told him I had given everything to him. Not just money, not just the house, time, patience, understanding, forgiveness. I told him about the nights I stayed up holding him when he was sick, the lunches I skipped to buy his baseball cleats, the years I worked double shifts to keep him in school. I didn't raise him to be cruel. I didn't raise him to be silent while someone else weaponized his last name. He blinked hard, swallowed, but said nothing. Then he asked something. He asked what would happen next. I told him the truth. I told him that April would likely be charged, that the bank was under review, that Briggs was already out of a job, that the civil suit would proceed, that the house would come back to me, and that nothing between us would ever be the same. He nodded slowly. Then he did something I didn't expect. He apologized. Not just with words. He said he would testify. He said he would bring the texts, the emails, the conversations, the files on the home computer. He said April had kept records. She always did. For control. For insurance. He said he could get them. He said he was willing to hand them over. Not for me. For Hannah. Because one day she would grow up and ask. And he didn't want to lie. I watched him say it. Every word. I believed him. Not because it was perfect or noble or brave, but because it was broken. because it came from a place of shame, not glory. I told him I would pass his offer to McDougall. I told him cooperation didn't undo the past, but it might help clean up the mess he helped make. He nodded again, stood up. Before he left, he looked around the kitchen like he was seeing it for the first time, or maybe the last. He said the house felt different without me. I didn't respond. He walked to the door, then he turned back. He said if I ever wanted to talk again, I could call. I told him not to wait by the phone, then I closed the door behind him. I stood there for a moment, not to cry, not to collapse, but to let the silence settle back into its place. Because that conversation wasn't closure, it wasn't healing, it was just acknowledgement. It was the line between betrayal and consequence. That night, I told McDougall everything. He said Dylan's testimony could speed things up. He said it might save weeks, even months of litigation. He asked if I wanted to sit down with Dylan again. I said no. We weren't circling back. We were moving forward. And I wasn't dragging the past behind me just because it decided to knock on my door. The hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning, early enough that the courthouse was still waking up. Agnes drove me. McDougall met us out front. He wore the same grey suit I had seen him in 3 times before, tie straight, expression unreadable. Inside it was quiet, the kind of quiet that clung to the walls. Cold marble floors, fluorescent lights that made everything look a little harsher. April was already there. She sat across the aisle with her attorney, arms folded tightly over her stomach, face blank. Dylan sat 2 rows behind her, alone. When the clerk called the case, we all stood. The judge entered. He was older than I expected, but sharp. Calm eyes, thin voice. He looked at the room like he had already read everything twice. McDougall started. He walked the judge through the timeline, the signatures, the missing disclosures, the sudden title transfer, the fraudulent refinance attempt, the complaint from the prosecutor's office, and finally Dylan's sworn affidavit and supporting documents, emails, text messages, screenshots, voice memos, files from the home computer, all of it. April didn't flinch, but her attorney did. He kept shifting in his chair, flipping through his notes like he was hoping for a different version of the truth to appear. Then McDougall handed over the final exhibit, a transcript from Hannah's school counselor. One of the teachers had reported a concerning comment. Hannah had said her mommy said Grandma was gone for good, that Grandma gave them the house because she was too old to live in it anymore. The counselor hadn't taken action at the time. But after reading the article and watching the news unfold, she came forward. It wasn't just a legal violation now. It was ethical, moral, familial. The judge asked April's attorney for a response. He asked for time, claimed new information, claimed his client had not been fully briefed. The judge denied the delay. Then he spoke. He said he had seen many cases over the years. He said most came down to contracts, numbers, and missing pages. But this one came down to character. He looked at April. He said she had manipulated an elderly woman, used family ties as leverage, and attempted to cover it all with paperwork that did not hold up under scrutiny. He looked at me. He said I had shown restraint, dignity, and strength in the face of layered betrayal. Then he ruled. The title transfer was nullified. The house was legally returned to me. April was ordered to pay restitution and penalties, pending the outcome of the criminal investigation. Dylan's cooperation was acknowledged in the ruling. The civil suit would proceed separately. And just like that, the weight I had carried for months cracked, not lifted, not gone, but cracked. After the hearing, McDougall handed me the signed order. I didn't smile. I didn't celebrate. I folded the paper neatly, placed it in my bag, and thanked him. Agnes squeezed my hand. We walked outside into a wind that felt sharper than it had in weeks. At the bottom of the courthouse steps, Dylan waited. He didn't speak, just nodded once. Then he walked away. I didn't look for April. 3 days later, I stood on the front porch of my house again. Only this time, I had the keys. A deputy walked with me to the front door, not because it was necessary, but because protocol required it. I unlocked the door. The house was silent, dust in the air, furniture gone, the kitchen stripped, the living room empty except for a rolled-up rug and a broken floor lamp. The scent of lemon cleaner lingered, artificial and sour. I walked from room to room. In the hallway, the small notches on the wall where I used to measure Dylan's height were still there. Faint, faded, but there. I touched the wall, then I sat on the floor. Not because I was tired, but because it was over. I was home. That night, I didn't sleep in the guest room at Agnes's. I slept in my own bed. The frame had been moved, the mattress replaced. But it didn't matter. The walls knew me. The floor knew the sound of my steps. The house knew I was back. In the morning, I made coffee and stood by the window facing the lake. The water was calm, flat as glass. Clouds stretched low over the trees. Somewhere across the shoreline, I imagined April waking up in a rented condo, Dylan on a couch, Hannah asking where her room went. I didn't feel pity. I felt something closer to silence, a kind of peace that didn't need music or movement. By noon, the locksmith arrived. I changed every lock. Then I called Daniel Price. I asked if he still wanted to do the follow-up story. He said yes. We scheduled the interview for the next day. Not because I wanted to be on camera, but because I knew someone, somewhere, was sitting in her car outside a courthouse, feeling like no one would ever believe her. I wanted her to know I had walked that road. And I came back home. The camera crew arrived at 9 in the morning, 2 young men in jeans and windbreakers, plus Daniel Price in a navy jacket and scarf, coffee in hand. He greeted me with a warmth I didn't fully trust yet. I led them inside. The house felt different with people in it again. The empty rooms no longer echoed with the memories of what was stolen, but with the reality of what I had reclaimed. I offered coffee, not out of hospitality, but because I needed something for my hands to do. Daniel walked through the space like someone trying not to disturb ghosts. He paused at the window by the lake. He glanced at the bare wall in the hallway. He didn't ask questions. He already had them written down. We sat in the living room, a single chair for me. The others stood or sat on cases and gear bags. One of the crew adjusted the lights. The other checked sound. Daniel placed a small mic on my collar and gave me a nod when they were ready. He asked if I was comfortable. I said I was ready. He didn't start with the court case. He started with the porch. The moment I handed over the keys, the moment I stepped off the property. I told him I didn't feel pain that day. I felt erased, like someone had wiped my name off a chalkboard and replaced it with theirs. I told him the sound I remembered most wasn't April's voice or Dylan's silence. It was the door closing behind me. Daniel asked how I found the strength to keep going. I told him I didn't. Not at first. That strength isn't something you find. It's something you build, brick by brick, until the person who took everything from you realizes they forgot to take your will. We spoke for almost an hour. I gave him the facts. I gave him the context. I gave him the weight of what it means to be betrayed by blood and bound by silence. When the cameras turned off, Daniel stood and shook my hand. He said something quiet about how stories like mine don't come around often. I didn't answer. I wasn't interested in being exceptional, I was interested in being heard. By afternoon, the interview was edited and scheduled for release. It aired that evening on local news, then spread online within hours. The comments were immediate. People wrote about their own mothers, their own betrayals, their own quiet battles. One woman said she had signed over her farm to her son and hadn't seen him since. Another said her daughter emptied her bank account while she was in the hospital. The stories poured in like rain. Agnes forwarded the messages she received. McDougall got calls from advocacy groups. Daniel texted that major outlets were requesting syndication. I didn't respond. That wasn't the reason I spoke. I didn't tell my story for headlines. I told it to make April uncomfortable every time someone whispered her name in a room. I told it so that Dylan would have to explain to Hannah one day why Grandma wasn't around for Christmas. I told it because the silence they tried to bury me under was now loud enough to echo in places they never expected. A week passed. Then another. The civil suit progressed. The criminal investigation expanded. Ron Briggs attempted to distance himself. April's attorney withdrew. Dylan started working part-time at a warehouse outside of town. And then the letter came. It was handwritten. Plain white envelope, no return address. Inside, a single page. April's handwriting, not dramatic, not apologetic. She said she had seen the interview. She said she didn't expect it to reach that far. She said she hadn't slept since the day of the hearing. She asked for nothing. She offered no excuses, just a sentence. You made sure I couldn't outrun it. I folded the letter once and placed it in the kitchen drawer with the rest of the paperwork. Not to keep it close, but to remind myself that even liars eventually tell the truth. Agnes came over that night. She brought soup and a newspaper. We sat by the fireplace and didn't speak for a while. Then she told me something I hadn't expected. She said a group of women from the community center wanted me to speak, not on camera, not to reporters, to them. Older women, many of them living alone, some with adult children who had started circling them like sharks. At first, I hesitated. I didn't want to become a symbol. I didn't want to turn my wounds into a podium. But Agnes said something that stayed with me. You're not a warning, you're a blueprint. That night, I opened my notebook again, the one I started in the motel, the one that used to be filled with evidence and questions. Now it had space for something else, maybe a guide, maybe a list of red flags, maybe just one page that said, "You are not crazy for noticing the way they speak to you has changed. You are not dramatic for asking where your name went on the deed. You are not weak for standing up when they tell you to sit down and stay quiet. You are not alone." That was how I ended the page, not with my name, but with a sentence I had earned the right to say. 3 weeks after the interview aired, I called a real estate agent, not to sell the house, not this time. I asked her to meet me on a Thursday morning to walk the property and take stock of everything it could become. Not what it was, not what April tried to make it, but what it could stand for, moving forward. The house had always been just a home to me, a place with floorboards that creaked and windows that fogged in winter. But now it was something different. It had become a symbol, whether I wanted it or not. That morning, the agent walked room to room, nodding and jotting notes. She asked if I wanted to list it or lease it. I said neither. She paused. I told her I wanted to donate the house, the entire property. Her pen stopped moving. I told her I had spoken with a non-profit that supports women over 50 who have survived family-based financial abuse. Most of them were isolated. Many had no legal resources. Some had been evicted, manipulated, erased like I had. The organization needed a retreat space, a place to breathe, to heal. I told her this house would be it. She blinked at me. not confused, just surprised. Then she smiled and said she'd help with the paperwork. By that afternoon, I had begun the process of transferring the property into a charitable trust. MacDougall reviewed every word of the documents himself. Agnes helped spread the word through her networks. Daniel Price picked the story up again, but this time I didn't speak on camera. I let the act speak for itself. When the paperwork finalized 2 weeks later, I walked the edge of the property line alone. The lake shimmered in the distance. A few leaves had started to turn, flickers of gold and red in the trees. I thought about how long it had taken me to feel like I wasn't holding my breath inside my own walls. Now, someone else would get that chance. A month after the trust was completed, the house hosted its first weekend circle. 8 women came. Some arrived with overnight bags and unsure eyes. Others came straight from court hearings or shelters. I didn't lead the group. I just opened the door. I made coffee. I stocked the fridge. I sat on the back porch and listened to the way they laughed in the kitchen. It wasn't loud, but it was honest. One of them asked to walk by the lake. She was maybe my age, maybe older. She had short grey hair and a voice that broke in the middle of her words. She said she hadn't been around water in 10 years. Her ex-husband hated it, wouldn't let her even look at the ocean, said it made her soft. She stood by the edge for a long time. I stood beside her and didn't speak. She thanked me later, but I didn't take credit. The house had done its job. By spring, the circle had become a monthly program. The rooms were furnished. The kitchen was stocked. A lawyer from the city offered to give free seminars once a month. A therapist joined to run group sessions. They called it the Doc House. I visited twice a month, sometimes more, sometimes less. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the house no longer held my pain. It held possibility. That March, I received an envelope. Different handwriting this time. Inside was a card. No signature, no return address, just a note. They said, "She's learning how to swim." That was all. I didn't need to ask who sent it. I didn't need to know how it got there. I just tucked the card inside the guest room nightstand drawer, next to a copy of the house rules, and a candle, and a photograph of the lake from the day the trust became real. That same week, I received an invitation. The city was hosting a panel on aging and financial rights. They wanted me to speak, not as a victim, not even as a survivor, as someone who changed the conversation. I almost said no, but Agnes, in her usual way, said it was already too late. She had RSVP'd for me, so I went. The event was small, tucked in the back of a library meeting room, no cameras, just folding chairs and a whiteboard. I wore my black cardigan and silver brooch. I told my story again. But this time, I told it without tremble, without needing to protect anyone else's shame. I ended the talk with a sentence I had written in my notebook months ago. "You are not a burden for asking to stay in the home you built." When I looked up, no one clapped, no one moved. But the silence was full. It was the kind of quiet that wraps around your shoulders like something earned. That night, I walked home instead of riding with Agnes. The sidewalk was uneven in places. My feet hurt halfway up the block. But I kept walking. The air smelled like pine. And my house, when I turned the corner and saw it glowing in the dark, looked like it belonged to something much bigger than me. It looked like the beginning of someone else's story. And maybe that was enough. By the end of April, I knew it was time. Not for closure, not for revenge, for precision, for clarity, for something sharp and undeniable. Agnes helped me put it together. She had more contacts than I did, and more patience for coordinating a large event. I told her I didn't want speeches or fanfare. Just one dinner. One moment, one table, one truth. We booked a private room at the Willow on 5th, a well-known restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows and soft lighting. The kind of place people chose to be seen. The kind of place April would not expect me to be. The guest list was small and deliberate. City council members, representatives from women's legal aid foundations, a handful of journalists who had followed my case from the beginning. Daniel Price would be there, but not as press, as witness. And McDougal, of course, calm as always, with his worn leather briefcase and a face made of granite. The invitation to April and Dylan was sent without emotion. It was printed on ivory cardstock, delivered by hand to their current address. I knew they wouldn't ignore it. April had always cared about appearances, and she had no idea what was coming. The dinner was set for 7. I arrived early. Agnes was already there, double-checking table settings and making sure the seating arrangement was firm. She looked over her glasses when I entered and gave me a small nod. No words. We were past needing them. By the time the room filled, I was ready. April and Dylan arrived last. She wore a navy dress and pearls. He looked tired, a little heavier, less polished. I stood when they entered. They didn't expect that. No one spoke right away. The waiter poured wine. Water. Bread was passed. Names were exchanged. Greetings murmured. It could have been any polite evening among professionals. Until I stood again. I didn't toast. I didn't smile. I handed McDougal a folder. He opened it. He began reading. Not loudly, not with drama, just steady. Statement of revocation of power of attorney, affidavits of misrepresentation and fraud, a notarized timeline of events, with April's forged signature on the mortgage refinance application. Evidence of financial manipulation, including screenshots, transcripts, and dated receipts. And then the final page. The formal notification that April's real estate license had been suspended pending further investigation. You could feel the shift. April sat frozen. Dylan blinked twice. He looked from her to me and then back again. The room remained quiet, but not neutral. It was the silence of shifting allegiance, of people recalibrating where they stood. I let McDougal finish. Then I spoke. I said I wasn't there for sympathy, or revenge, or to reclaim anything. I had already reclaimed it. The house, the truth, my voice. I said I was there because too many people in that room had seen this kind of theft before, and called it unfortunate instead of criminal. And that silence was no longer an option. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The papers said enough. I sat down. No one clapped. No one needed to. The waiter brought out the main course. People ate in near silence. April stayed seated for 15 minutes more. Then she stood. No words, just motion. She walked out the side door with her heels tapping fast across the tile. Dylan stayed. He didn't speak to me, but he didn't follow her either. The dinner ended slowly. Daniel caught my eye once, not with pity, but with something closer to understanding. The others thanked me quietly. Agnes drove me home. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from unrest, from the stillness that followed something complete. The next morning, the story ran in 3 publications: the suspension, the investigation. The civil suit filed against April by 2 other former clients she had handled under similar terms. Her brokerage firm distanced themselves within 24 hours. Her name was removed from their website. The trust had already been sealed. The house was untouchable. My finances were clear. McDougal had ensured that. But what mattered most wasn't what I kept. It was what she lost. Not money, not property, but the illusion. The mask she wore at every dinner party, every networking event, every family gathering where she smiled too wide. It cracked, and everyone saw. In the weeks that followed, I returned to the dockhouse more frequently. I didn't tell the women there about the dinner, but they knew. Sometimes, justice didn't need an audience. It only needed to be real. And that night at the Willow, it had been. Undeniably. 3 weeks after the dinner at the Willow, I was standing by the window of the dockhouse kitchen, drying a coffee mug with one of those rough beige towels that always smelled faintly of lavender. The lake outside was still. No wind, no ripples, just the reflection of clouds, thick and low. The kind of morning that pulled memory out of your bones. The doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. Agnes was at a conference. The women weren't due until the weekend. The lawyer wasn't scheduled for his seminar until Monday. I opened the door and saw her. April. She was alone. No makeup, no designer jacket. Just a grey sweatshirt and jeans. Her eyes were red, like she hadn't slept properly in days. She didn't speak. I stepped aside and let her in. Not because I had forgiven her, but because I wasn't afraid of her anymore. We sat in the front room. The sun wasn't out, but the light found its way through the tall windows anyway. I didn't offer her tea. I didn't ask why she had come. I waited. She looked around the room like it was foreign. Her gaze fell on the photo of the first healing circle we had hosted. Her mouth twitched at the corner. Maybe it was recognition. Maybe it was shame. I didn't ask. Finally, she spoke. She said she didn't know how to undo what had already been done, that she wasn't there for sympathy, that she wasn't even there for reconciliation. She said she just wanted to sit across from me and say the words she never had the courage to say before. She said she was sorry, not just for the house, but for the slow undoing of dignity she had inflicted over time, for the manipulation, for the small humiliations, for pretending she was the only adult in the room when I had been holding that entire family on my shoulders for decades. She looked down at her hands, said Dylan had moved out, that he blamed her, that he couldn't understand how she had let it go so far, but that the truth was, she hadn't just let it go. She had driven it. She said she used to feel powerful watching me diminish. Every time I deferred, every time I gave in, every time I nodded and let her decision stand. She said it made her feel like she mattered more, because deep down, she had never felt like she belonged, never felt like she could live up to the space I held in that family. But the power she stole didn't make her strong, it made her cruel. She admitted she lost her license for now, that the investigation was still pending, that she might be charged if the others moved forward, that her name was, in her words, burnt toast in the real estate world. She didn't ask me to fix it. She didn't ask for help. She just wanted to look me in the eye and say that she finally understood the cost, and that maybe the worst part wasn't what she lost, it was what she couldn't take back. I let her speak, every word, not because it softened anything, but because I needed to hear them for myself. I didn't answer her right away. I just sat there, the same way I had sat in silence that night. She turned the lock on my own front door. Eventually, I told her I didn't know if forgiveness was something I owed her, or even something I wanted to pursue, that what she did had consequences, and she was living them now. But I also told her that I wasn't angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. That part had been burned out of me somewhere between the eviction and the dinner at the Willow. I told her I hoped she took the lesson, not for me, not even for Dylan, but because next time she wouldn't have the excuse of not knowing better. April didn't cry, but something in her deflated. She stood to leave, stopped at the door, looked at me one last time, and said she didn't expect to be welcome back. And I told her she wasn't, but that the dock house would still be here. Not for her, For the ones who hadn't had the chance to break anything yet. She nodded and left. I stood at the window and watched her walk down the gravel path, past the edge of the lake, back to whatever life she had to rebuild. Then I turned away from the window and picked up the coffee mug I had left on the counter. It was cold now, but I rinsed it, dried it again, and placed it gently back in the cabinet, like something restored. The days after April's visit blurred into one another, not because nothing was happening, but because I had finally let go of the urge to brace for what came next. There was no next blow waiting, no trap to be sprung, no new betrayal circling the edge of my life like a wolf in tall grass. What remained was stillness, and in that stillness, clarity. I spent more time at the dock house, not managing or advising, but being present. I started walking the shoreline again, even when the wind was sharp and the skies looked like bruised cotton. There was something healing in putting one foot in front of the other without purpose. One afternoon, as I sat on the bench that faced the lake, I saw a woman about my age walking slowly across the dock. She moved carefully, like she had survived something, and I recognized that posture. It wasn't physical pain. It was the quiet caution of someone learning how to take up space again. Her name was Lorraine, too. She had come from the Midwest, left a 25-year marriage after discovering her husband had not only been unfaithful, but had signed over their joint retirement savings to a second family she didn't know existed. She said it softly, not as a confession, but as a fact. Like the weather. I listened, not as someone older or wiser, just someone who had sat in the same pit once. She asked me what I did when I finally stood up again. I told her I planted something, not a metaphor, an actual garden. Behind the dock house, in the soft soil near the west corner, I had started laying out the beds for vegetables and herbs. I had told Agnes it was for the guests, for the kitchen, for therapy. But part of me knew it was also for me. A place to put my hands in the dirt and remember I was still a living thing. Lorraine smiled, said she used to grow tomatoes, but stopped after her son told her it was a waste of effort for someone your age. I felt something flicker inside me. Not anger, recognition. I told her age was not the measure of effort. I said the real waste was letting someone else decide how we spend what little time we have left. She looked at me, and something in her shoulders relaxed. Not all the way, but enough. That evening, I sat by the garden plot, looking out toward the lake. It was quiet, and in that quiet, I finally heard my own breath. I realized I didn't miss the house. Not the bricks, not the rooms, not the kitchen I had remodeled twice over the years. What I missed for a long time was the illusion, the sense that if I just stayed steady, stayed kind, stayed quiet, they would come around. But they didn't, because that narrative was never mine to begin with. I had spent decades being the background, the support beam, the soft landing, but I wasn't built to be invisible. I thought about Dylan. I thought about all the moments he had let slip by without stepping in. And then I thought about myself. Not the mother, not the widow, not the tenant forced out of her own home. Me, Lorraine Madsen, the woman who rebuilt her entire identity not by clawing back what was taken, but by walking forward without asking for it back. That night, I pulled out a box from under the guest room bed. It was the last one I hadn't unpacked. Inside were 3 framed photographs. One was from Dylan's high school graduation, one from my wedding, one from the backyard barbecue we used to host every July 4th before things had started unraveling. I placed the first 2 back in the box. I kept the third, because in that photo, I wasn't smiling for anyone else. I was holding a tray of iced tea sun in my eyes, mouth slightly open mid-laugh, surrounded by people I barely remembered, but filled with a presence I could still feel. That was me, unfiltered, uncontained. I set it on the shelf in the hallway. Then I sat in the armchair in the front room, pulled a blanket over my legs, and let my body rest. For the first time in months, I didn't rehearse anything in my head. No speeches, no comebacks, no defenses. Just breath. Just being. Because there comes a point when healing isn't about fighting anymore. It's about allowing yourself to exist fully, without explanation. And in that quiet, I didn't feel erased. I felt whole. The morning of the hearing, I woke early. I didn't eat much, just a slice of toast, half a cup of coffee. But I got dressed with care. Slacks, jacket, the pearls that used to be my mother's. I looked at myself in the mirror, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't see someone bracing for war. I saw someone who had already survived it. The courthouse wasn't crowded, just a few quiet people in the hallway, a receptionist with tired eyes, and a few family law attorneys hovering near the benches. I sat alone, folder in my lap, back straight. It was Dylan and Meredith's hearing, technically. I wasn't required to be there, but I had every right to attend. Inside the room, their attorney made a show of pushing papers, adjusting glasses, setting the narrative. Meredith wore soft colours. Dylan kept his eyes down. It wasn't until the judge asked to hear from the other side that things shifted. I didn't stand to speak. That part wasn't mine. Instead, it was a voice from the corner. Marta's. She was calm, clear. The new attorney I had found for her, with support from the women's clinic, helped her file a formal claim regarding the fraudulent activity tied to Meredith's previous financial record. That claim was now in discovery and had already frozen several accounts connected to their household business activity. The judge paused, and then, slowly, asked for clarification. The room turned quiet as a series of documents were handed across the table. Screenshots, deposits, transfers, details they thought were hidden in shells and sub-LLCs. Not so hidden anymore. That moment didn't need volume to be powerful. It just needed truth. And truth has a way of being louder than shouting. Dylan's attorney asked for a recess. The judge denied it. Proceedings would continue. I stayed in my seat, still as stone. Because I wasn't there for vengeance, I was there to witness the consequences. When the hearing concluded, there was no grand scene, just a list of items ordered for investigation, a financial audit, temporary limitations on certain activities, and a follow-up court date that would not favor them. I walked out slowly. The hallway was quiet again, but my steps felt lighter. That afternoon, I returned to the dockhouse. April was in the kitchen. Agnes was restocking books in the corner reading area. Lorraine had planted a few tomato starters in the garden out back. It was ordinary, and it was everything. I walked to the back, looked over the small rows of soil, and reached for the watering can. The sun was low. The earth smelled warm. I poured gently, letting the water soak deep. Because things don't heal on their own. They need tending, they need patience, and most of all, they need us to stop pretending we can keep giving everything away without breaking. Later that week, I mailed a letter. Not to Dylan, not to Meredith, to myself. I had never written myself a letter before. It felt strange at first. But once I started, the words came easily. I forgave myself. For waiting too long. For hoping too hard. For not seeing it sooner. But I also thanked myself. For choosing to live, not just exist. For saying no. For reclaiming my voice in silence. I sealed the envelope and tucked it in a drawer by my bedside. Not to forget, but to remember. Because healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it looks like planting a seed and trusting it will grow. Sometimes it looks like a woman over 70 standing in a room where she was once erased and being the only one still standing at the end. And sometimes it looks like peace, not because they gave it to you, but because you stopped asking. If you've ever been made to feel invisible in your own home, your own family, I hope this story reminded you that silence is not weakness. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is rebuild on our own terms. Let me know how this story made you feel. I'm listening.